Welcome back everyone. Today we're going to be taking a quick look at a summoner weapon that got changed in the 1.4.4 update, the Xeno Staff. I wanted to review this item because in the latest hotfix 1.4.4.9, along with massive sprite revamps and other item changes, the Xeno Staff got a nerf to its fire rate, since apparently the AI changes made to the item as a buff were significantly more impactful than expected. Oh god. God, no! The AI! It's taking over! This piqued my interest as when originally reading through the patch notes, the Xeno Staff changes didn't strike me as all that noteworthy, but evidently they were, and they're a different kind of change to an item than I've looked at in my other videos since the release of the update. So I thought that I would take a look and do some before and after comparisons. But quickly, before we get into the meat of the video, I usually don't say this, but I would be extremely grateful if you subscribed to the channel, as I'm literally like 20 away from hitting 1,000 subscribers and getting the chance to monetize my channel. So take a few minutes to watch the video, and if you like it and want to see more, do me a solid and hit that big white button. Man, that really doesn't feel right. Why did they change the subscribe button's color? That 20 seconds of shilling is enough to make me want to vomit all over myself, so let's just move on to what we're really interested in, the changes to the Xeno Staff. We have a fire rate reduction, which was further nerfed in the hotfix like I've already mentioned, and then we have the interesting ones, which are basically behavioral changes for the little UFOs that this item summons. With the update, they no longer need to return to the player before they can teleport and re-engage with a new enemy, and they will now be able to return to the player faster depending on how fast the player is moving. The first change is very obviously huge upon reading it a second time, as a summon needing to return to you after every enemy that it kills or even just loses track of in order to target and go after another one is extremely detrimental and wastes a lot of time that the summons could spend attacking. The second change isn't as obvious in its use, though I'm pretty sure it's just meant to allow the UFOs to keep up with the player easier if they're off attacking something and you move further away. These buffs certainly make the item better in most general situations running around your world, where hopping from enemy to enemy should make the summons much more efficient at their job, but I don't know if they actually help out against bosses at all, which is what I really want to test. We have here what I think is a standard setup for this point in the game, all of the summoner accessories, spooky armor, the Dark Harvest whip, and of course our weapon in question, along with a standard fully optimized buff setup. Keep in mind that the Dark Harvest is an item that got a rework in 1.4.4, and many bosses got changes, so the performance in this version of the game will not be affected by just the changes to the Xeno Staff. So basically, don't take any of my conclusions as fact, as there's a lot of altered factors at play here that might significantly change the outcomes of the fights we test. Let's just get right into it though. I decided to fight all the bosses up to the Empress of Light in both 1.4 and 1.4.4, pretty much just for fun. Duke Fishron, the Empress, the Lunatic Cultist, and Moonlord are the only four that come after the point that you get the Xeno Staff, so are the only ones that should end up being any sort of real challenge. Though I didn't end up fighting Moonlord because by the time I gathered all the other footage, it was kind of late and I really just wanted to get to work on actually getting the video done and out to you guys, and I just straight up forgot about the Lunatic Cultist. All of the fights are done in Master Mode, of course, and I did this comparison in the most objective way I could think of, by timing each boss fight clip from the first frame that the boss takes damage to the frame that it is killed to see how long it took to beat each one. I'll be showing the fights to you side by side and placing the time each one took to beat at the end of each clip, starting with the Queen Slime. I'll just be talking over most of these fights because, spoiler alert, most of them aren't very long. The Xeno Staff and Dark Harvest make quick work of all the bosses, especially up to Duke Fishron, as expected. You can still die to the early bosses if you're not careful, because Summoner as a class is extremely frail and even the earlier bosses can do large amounts of damage to you, so be careful. It was somewhat surprising to me. You'll see that in 1.4.4, even after doubling down on the fire rate nerfs on the Xeno Staff, it does seem significantly stronger than it was in 1.4. And it's one of the strangest feelings I've had testing a weapon, because the whole time before actually putting the clips in my video editor and checking, I had no clue in which version of the game I was actually killing the bosses faster in. I had no idea about the times as I was gathering the footage, because in both game versions, the bosses were being killed very fast, but regardless of how much an effect the change changes to the Dark Harvest and the bosses had on the fights, in comparison, it's actually incredible how much worse the Xeno Staff feels to use in 1.4, which evidently carried over at least somewhat into practice, as it was significantly inferior in almost every boss fight in that version of the game. It's hard to spot at times, and the UFO summon's weird behavior is inconsistent, so much so that it almost feels like the weapon was buggy instead of just suffering from faulty AI. For the most part, the summons would just attack and do their own thing, but there are very noticeable times where the flock of UFOs will just follow you for multiple seconds, not attacking, which results in lapses of damage, and sometimes they seem to have trouble retargeting when you begin attacking a new enemy, whereas they're very responsive in 1.4.4 and will almost immediately move and lock onto a new target that you hit with a whip. These are obviously behaviors that the changes insinuate were meant to be fixed in the first place, but it was just very jarring when I went back and saw how much more janky the Xeno Staff was before the changes after using it in the new update, where I never really noticed that much of an issue with it before. Though to be fair, Summoner as a weapon type and class has most definitely been my least used throughout my personal history playing the game. Plantera was the final fight that I don't have any particular thoughts about, as it was an absolute slam dunk and the boss stood no chance, though I will voice that it was extremely frustrating actually getting the fight going in 1.4, as for some reason Plantera bulbs weren't spawning in my world even after playing for like 3 to 4 in-game days, setting up arenas and doing the other boss fights, and I ended up just spawning Plantera with cheat sheets and PC browser, which I didn't realize you could use to just spawn bosses, but fortunately for me, you can. Golem was the singular weird exception out of all of these fights. Just like most of the other ones up to this point, he got destroyed. But in this one alone, the Xeno Staff performed better in 1.4, killing the boss almost 10 seconds faster than in the most recent version of the game. No one watched my video covering the Brain of Cthulhu and Golem, but in that one, half of the video was dedicated to the massive buffs to Golem, partially covering the insane durability boosts that the boss received, which I think are the sole reason that it survived so much longer in 1.4.4, really highlighting the importance of those buffs. Duke Fishron was another boss that I figured might have a similar outcome, as it also received huge buffs in the update, now being invulnerable during his transition phases, so you can't just get free damage, and getting base health and difficulty health scaling buffs that end up with the boss having more than 20,000 more HP in master mode. There wasn't a very wide margin in the kill times, but I'm still somewhat surprised that the boss ended up being defeated faster in 1.4.4 at all, because of how much more tanky it is. I feel like this has to be a case of the Xeno Staff's AI behavior just being extremely detrimental in the previous version of the game and being bad at tracking Duke Fishron, because it's crazy how much more overall damage the buffs make up for, even with a statistical nerf. A similar thing seemed to happen with the Empress of Light, or I would imagine it's a similar thing, because these last two fights happen to be the least affected by the Dark Harvest's rework, which was mainly centered around nerfing its insane attack speed buff, but allowing the weapon to proc its effect on multiple enemies, or segments of enemies, meaning that the changes are the least impactful on the Duke Fishron and Empress, which both only have one hitbox, where all of the other bosses do actually have multiple segments or spawn extra enemies. So the Xeno Staff got to shine in the most important fights, and shine it did. This was the more balanced, important fight between versions, as the Empress of Light received no statistical changes in 1.4.4, and seeing how the Xeno Staff performed against Duke Fishron even with the boss's buffs, I guess I shouldn't have been surprised by the discrepancy, but in 1.4.4, the battle clocked in at just under a minute, while in 1.4 it took over 40 more seconds, which is just insane, and I think is the real testament to how much stronger the weapon is now. That's pretty much it though. I thought that it was really cool seeing exactly how the Xeno Staff feels different with the AI changes through hands-on testing, and I was honestly surprised by how much stronger the weapon seems to be. I did this comparison in a different way than I generally do in my videos, and it was pretty fun. I hope you also enjoyed. Feedback in the comments is always appreciated to help me improve my videos, and I'll see you all in the next one.